Here for the Joint Standing Committee on Electoral Matters, our inquiry into the conduct of the 2025 House of Assembly and 2025 Legislative Council periodic elections. Mr Roland Browne, thank you for attending this hearing with us. The committee is present today. We have Michael Ferguson MP, Liberal Member for Bass, online. We've got the Honourable Beck Thomas, MLC, Member for Elwick, Ella Haddad, MP, Member for Clark, Honourable Cassie O'Connor, MLC, Member for Hobart, Meg Webb, Independent Member for Nelson. We've got Christy Johnson, MP, Member for Clark, Independent Member for Clark, and Honourable Mike Gaffney, MLC, Independent Member for Mersey. We've also got Scott assisting on Secretariat duties and Terry on Hansard. So as you would be familiar, I need to make you aware of some matters before we begin. Important aspects of committee proceedings: that the committee hearing is a proceeding of Parliament. It means it receives the protection of parliamentary privilege. It's an important legal protection that allows individuals giving evidence to a parliamentary committee to speak with complete freedom, without the fear of being sued or questioned in any court or place out of Parliament. It applies to ensure that Parliament receives the very best information when conducting its inquiries. It's important to be aware that this protection is not accorded to you if statements that may be defamatory are repeated or referred to by you outside the confines of the parliamentary proceedings. This is a public hearing. Members of the public and journalists may be present or listening, and this means that your evidence may be reported. It is important that should you wish all or part of your evidence to be heard in private, you must make this request and give an explanation prior to giving the relevant evidence. Do you understand?
I do.
Thank you. If you would like to make the statutory declaration and then perhaps an opening statement if you'd like to make it in relation to your submission.
I, Roland Alexander Browne, do solemnly promise and declare that the evidence I shall give to the committee shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. Would you like to make an opening statement?
I would, thank you. I made a submission to this committee on the 17th of November 2025, and since then quite some water has travelled under the bridge. I'm here representing an organisation named Our Place, which has played a role as a major contester in relation to the proposed Macquarie Point Stadium. And so the statement that I'm making and the evidence that I'm going to give today is to be seen through that prism. Now, the terms of reference for this inquiry refer to the conduct of the election as one of the issues to be considered, but it does not descend into the detail of just what that involves. And I would like to refer the committee to the equivalent committee of the Parliament of Victoria, where the terms of reference for that committee has been expanded by reference to international bodies and its own experience with electoral matters, to ask a number of particular questions. They are: was the election inclusive? Was the election trustworthy and transparent? Did the VEC meet its obligations? And lastly, and most importantly, was the election fair? They explain that as being a question as to whether a fair election has provided all candidates an equal opportunity to make their case to voters and to compete in the election. I would suggest these criteria ought be considered by this committee to be adopted and even broadened to look at the use and abuse of government resources in elections. I'm going to return to this later. But when you're looking, and if you are going to look, at whether the conduct of an election is fair, that concept embraces the electorate being well informed about the issues that they're asked to vote on. Now, my submission to this committee, the submission of the 17th of November last year, focused on how the most significant political issue over the 2 years before the 2025 election was not discussed by the major parties in the course of the July 2025 election. In general terms, the stadium as a topic was avoided at all costs. The state government had another plan. Enabled by an impotent and silent Labor opposition, it decided to inject the stadium into the election campaign through the vehicle of the Planning Commission hearings, which started in June of 2025. But we need to go back a bit in time to put all of this in perspective. On the 13th of April 2025, the Tasmanian Government announced it would introduce enabling legislation to progress development approval for the Macquarie Point multipurpose stadium. It wanted to bypass the very statutory assessment system it had previously invoked. On the 21st of May 2025, the Secretary of the Premier's Department wrote to the Tasmanian Planning Commission saying, "I write to advise that the government has formed the view that the integrated assessment process under the State Policies and Projects Act is no longer the preferred approach for the Crown to secure approval for the multi-point stadium proposed to be developed at Macquarie Point. The government considers that special purpose legislation represents a more expeditious and clearer path for approval for the stadium and will introduce this legislation into the Parliament in early June 2025. On the 27th of May 2025, as part of the release of the draft Macquarie Point Planning Permit Bill, the government provided a revised cost estimate for the Macquarie Point multipurpose stadium of $945 million. Subsequent to this, the government told the Planning Commission to pull up stumps on its integrated assessment. The government effectively said, "We'll take it from here." But the Planning Commission stood its ground, pointing out it had a legislative responsibility to complete the assessment. On the 4th of June 2025, the Labor opposition moved a motion of no confidence in the Liberal Premier, Jeremy Rockliff. The motion was passed by the lower house. The substantive argument for the no confidence motion related to the budget. From here on, the government was in limbo. Meanwhile, the first Tasmanian Planning Commission directions hearing was to be held on 10 June 2025. The government approached the Planning Commission and sought an adjournment of this hearing, but it was rejected and the hearing proceeded. On the 11th of June, Premier Rockliff advised Her Excellency to call an election for 19 July 2025. Then, on the 13th of June 2025, the state's lawyers wrote to the Tasmanian Planning Commission and demanded the Planning Commission hearings be deferred until August, as, they claimed, the state was prejudiced in presenting its case and because it was constrained by the Caretaker Convention, an election having been called. On 17 June 2025, the Planning Commission roundly rejected this proposal and dismissed the government's rationalisation. The government then decided on another plan. In correspondence to the Planning Commission, it proposed it would just make an opening address and, they said, possibly call some witnesses at the hearing, which was then due to start on 25 June 2025. This is just over 4 weeks before, just under 4 weeks before the election. This was what was intended to be a cursory involvement in the Planning Commission hearing. Then at some point, critically, between the 17th and the 25th of June 2025, the government changed its plan again. It now decided to run its pro-stadium election campaign through the Planning Commission and present all its witnesses. It decided on the glossy presentation approach. At the time, this should have been condemned by the Labor opposition and most in the media for the misuse of public funds that it was and for the faffing around over the regulation of such a major infrastructure project. But it was not. The next event of great significance in the context of the forthcoming election was that the Treasury produced the 2025 Tasmanian Pre-Election Financial Outlook Report, which revealed a severe structural deficit with net debt projected to reach $13 billion by 2027 and 2028. The alarm bells were rung by that report. They noted that there was a current cost estimate of $945 million at that time, but the actual cost of construction of the stadium would not have been known until the project was put to tender. The authors noted a range of issues could further impact on the cost of the stadium, including the tight construction market and the pressure imposed by the 2032 Brisbane Olympics, the bespoke nature of the roof design not previously delivered in Australia, which could lead contractors to either place a large price premium on the roof element or to be deterred from tendering to deliver the design, and the cost of related projects to support the stadium, not included in the $945 million estimate, including the Northern Access Road, then estimated to cost $75.9 million, and the underground car park, which we now know has since gone.
Mr Browne, if I could just note we're about 12 minutes into our 30 minutes allocated for the hearing, and I know members will have questions. So if I could just encourage you to perhaps consider some space for questions.
So the writing was on the wall. It's just that neither the ALP nor government were interested in reading it. Clearly, the cost trajectory since the initial announcement in May 2023 of $750 million was going only in one direction, upwards, and rapidly so. So much of the media continued on, as did the Labor opposition, of not asking the critical questions in the course of the election campaign. All of this during an election campaign in relation to one of the largest infrastructure projects in the state's history, set against a budget deficit projected to go through the roof. In the last part of June and early July 2025, the government poured massive resources into the TPC process as its contribution to the election campaign. 2 senior counsel, 1 junior counsel, and at least 4 mainland solicitors, plus a bevy of expert witnesses and consultants from interstate, flown down and accommodated to present the greatest show on earth. My estimate is that the costs conservatively would have been around $2 million for that exercise, but I expect it would be much, much more. So at this point, the government's about face and decision belatedly to participate in the Planning Commission hearings became a serious misuse of public funds. What to the government in May and early June was a waste of time and the wrong approach to assessment became a massive promotional opportunity for the government and its election campaign. It mounted its campaign in support of the stadium and the claimed massive economic benefits in the middle of the election campaign, but otherwise generally refused to talk about it. And of course, in the context of the election, we had the benefit of the March 31 Planning Commission report telling everybody that this infrastructure project was in the wrong location, was going to smash the cenotaph, was going to disfigure the heritage sightlines in Sullivan's Cove, cause significant disruption in the course of construction, and that everything was basically wrong about it. I make this point not to re-agitate the many problems with the stadium, but to highlight the failure of key players in the election to ask and answer the most basic questions. The way the election should have been conducted was for the opposition and its compliant media companions to press the government to reveal the true costs of the stadium and the true problems it faced in construction and location and management, and to tell us how it was going to manage the budget disaster that was made worse by the size of the cost of the stadium. Yet the Premier was allowed to get through an election campaign without being required to disclose the latest estimated cost of the stadium. How was this possible? The latest cost was not revealed until after the election and after the Planning Commission hearings had concluded. How could this be? The figure of $1.13 billion did not suddenly arrive for the first time in September 2025. It would have been well known to the government's consultants at the time of the Planning Commission hearings and certainly at the time of the election. We were all misled. And more significantly, the democratic process failed us because the Labor Party and many in the media failed to pursue these important questions. The opposition's questioning about the status of the budget throughout the election campaign, commencing from well before the no confidence motion on 4 June 2025, seemed to be directed to every major infrastructure and service cost to the state apart from the stadium. To the Labor opposition and most in the media, the stadium was not a visible budget expenditure item. It's a tragedy that the government was never held to account for the entirety of the costs of the stadium project during the election campaign. And of course, it's not just the stadium, it's the high performance centre at Kingston with its budget blowing out before our very eyes, even before a sod has been turned. It's the high performance centre for cricket. It's the Northern Access Road. It's the purchase of 80 buses. It's the costs of making accommodations to appease the TSO. The list goes on. These are all to be funded from money that belongs to the people of Tasmania.
Yep.
Alternative uses for that money were never debated. Voters had no idea of what they stood to lose from the construction of an unfunded statement. And the channeling of public funds into the Planning Commission hearings from the 25th of June, after the government had all but withdrawn from the process 2 months earlier, calls for an investigation. Can I remind this committee that the Integrity Commission is currently looking at the use and misuse of public resources during election campaigns. I suggest the Planning Commission hearings by the Liberal government warrants a close look by the TIC as an example of this misuse. The state has not been well served by the major parties in their attitude to the last election. They could do so much better. They could reach for the sky, they could seek to inspire, they could protect what people value and lay down foundations for a secure financial future. They could invest massively in education and bring Tasmania forward. They could have debated ideas and ways to deliver AFL teams without the unmitigated disaster that is the proposed Macquarie Point Stadium. Instead, they viewed the election as a race to the bottom, ignoring the budget, the stadium and our collective futures. The government misused public funds on the way through. We all deserve a much better deal from our major parties. After all, it's our money they are spending. Sorry to have run on.
No, thank you, Mr Browne. I just wanted to draw your attention in the middle there that we did have questions, so I appreciate the extent of your statement, and we'll go now to questions. Ms O'Connor.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr Browne, for your submission and your advocacy for integrity in politics and your defence of our democratic institutions. Your case study is, we can agree, a travesty. Do you believe the Tasmanian people were lied to or misled during the last state election campaign about the stadium?
Well, if you're leading people to believe a state of affairs that's incorrect, that's effectively a lie, and it's misleading people. And that's certainly the point I've tried to make in relation to the costs of the stadium and the budgetary problems that it will be causing.
So the question is, how do you prevent or mitigate that kind of scenario? Because, for example, truth in political advertising laws wouldn't account for that absence of truth-telling. Do you have any suggestions for how you might create a legal framework that drives the cultural change that prevents that kind of deliberate misleading of the electorate or, in fact, lying to the electorate from happening during campaigns?
Well, in my opinion, it all depends on accountability. and the accountability will derive from opposition parties dealing with the budget. Dealing with the government, but also the media. And I think the media has the most critical role to play in taking up opportunities to ask the difficult questions of ministers and government representatives, but also opposition parties and even independents, but asking those difficult questions and persisting with them.
And that's not something you can legislate for, though, is it? It's a cultural shift we're looking at here. And I might just say the Greens did ask those questions repeatedly during the campaign, put forward alternatives to the stadium spend. It was, in fact, the major parties who were not entirely truthful with voters around the stadium.
Well, my organisation issued 20 questions to the Minister, Erica Betts, and only one of those questions was answered. And when I went back to him and said, you haven't answered the other 19 questions, I never heard anything from him. So we tried to hold them to account too.
Yes, you did.
And you can't legislate it, but it's cultural and it's a slide. If it doesn't get better, it slides, and we lose our respect for the electoral process. There's so many countries in the world at the moment that either have no elections or their elections are partial. And we have an electoral system that can work really well. It just takes a commitment to integrity from the major players in it and from the media, and it's been lacking.
Thank you.
Ms. Thomas.
Thank you. I guess my question is, and perhaps you've just touched on it in your response to Ms O'Connor there, which is around, in your submission, you say electoral integrity requires parties to argue for their policies in the course of an election, not run dead on them and claim later they have a mandate. So is there a specific legislative change you'd like to see in order to address this? Like you mentioned there, it's about culture and cultural change, but if there's something that you were hoping this committee would recommend in terms of amendment to legislation to address that what you're seeking there, what would it look like?
I regret I can't offer a legislative solution, and I believe it's cultural, and it has to be driven by the people.
Okay.
Do you think the election was not fair on the basis of the fact that voters didn't have all the information before them? Going back to your suggestion that we adjust the terms of reference for this committee.
I don't think the election was fair. I think, and I say this in a considered way, I think the election was a disaster in the sense of fairness and informing voters. It was a failure. There was so much that people didn't know about the stadium. And of course, everybody would have heard the bad news about the budget that would trickle out through various networks and heard other problems such as contamination issues. It's very common, but it wasn't being released by the government. And we're in a position where the critical information was kept from the electorate and, I suggest, most of the members of Parliament. Mm-hmm. And in fact, what we saw is at the very final moment when the... and this is an example, very final moment when the order was being debated within the upper house, the government started to talk to some of the independents and started to negotiate how it was going to get that order through the upper house. And what came out of that process was a series of statements, a series of commitments that had not previously seen the light of day.
Yep.
Now, that was all material. I mean, in a way, I can say, well, good on the independents for getting that material out, but it was 6 months too late. That all should have come out in the course of the election. We should have known the government was going to have another crack yet again at another cap on the costs. We should have known that there was going to be a proposal that the budget and the oversight was going to come back to the Parliament. We didn't know anything about that, not until it had all been drawn up and finalised with the members of the upper house that were in that small block. And I make no reflection on them. I'm using this as an example as to what material there was that should have come out 6 months earlier. I mean, we didn't get to vote on any of this.
Ms Johnson.
Thank you.
Thank you, Roland. I take your point that both the major parties ran dead on the issue around the stadium, and it's difficult to legislate a change of culture. But in the absence of that, the community had to look to organisations such as yourself to give information, other candidates. The PFO report, though, and because the stadium was such a major project and had significant budget implications, do you think there is room, though, for the PFO report to be expanded to provide greater independent analysis of the budgetary implications of major projects such as the stadium, or might be Marinus, or whatever the next major project might be, to be able to drive that information provision to the community in the absence of cultural change in the parties to put information out about major projects that they might be campaigning on? Is there a room there? I'm trying to find a legislative way of trying to create a great information for the community to make a decision upon. Is there room there, the PFO? I mean, they obviously noted the stadium as a significant budget risk, but it didn't do particularly a lot of analysis or detailed risk analysis to the community about the stadium. Is there room for PFO to be more detailed, do you think?
Well, there is, but it would need some careful consideration. This economic report came out, 3.5 weeks before the election. And I would expect that the authors of that report had very limited notice that they were going to be writing that report.
Yeah.
It wasn't until the 4th of June or thereabouts at the earliest that they might have thought we better get onto it. That gave them 3 weeks. I don't know how those economists and financial experts could possibly analyse a project like the stadium and Marinus Link and anything else in such a short period of time. So I'm identifying that as a challenge, but that can be rectified with requirements that they have to have notice of these projects and perhaps be assessing them on an ongoing basis.
I suppose that's a fair comment where the project's new, but projects such as the stadium have been a long-standing project of the government, and you would assume that Treasury would have significant advice and analysis on that particular project, that it can independently, because PFO is independent of government, provide the community to help inform the community on major issues or projects.
That might be right. They weren't asked anything about the stadium before it was announced. They knew nothing about it. So I mean, if you say that they would have had this ongoing knowledge,
we'd hope. We would hope.
Can I pick up on
we don't know.
Can I pick up on that? Do you think that I'm trying to imagine other structural things around our electoral cycle that might assist at least with best opportunity for an informed electorate and best opportunity for media to do its job and discuss things in a public way that are being contemplated as election priorities or promises or policies? So, for example, fixed 4-year terms, except in situations of very particular sorts of disintegration of the parliament, may well be a structural thing. Is that something you've contemplated in terms of whether that's at least supportive towards an informed electorate and the opportunity to hold a government of the day or an opposition or whoever to account for the policies they take to an election?
Well, in your example, would the no confidence motion on the 4th of June 2025 have been one of the exceptions?
No,
to
probably
the 4-year
not.
rule?
In some of the things put to us who are making assertions about the need for fixed 4-year terms, they identify that wouldn't necessarily have been a trigger then to go to an election. It could have been dealt with within the parliament. So similarly for the previous elections. So.
Well, personally, I think 4-year terms would be ideal, but it's not a solution to the disastrous election campaign around the stadium, because if we had 4-year terms, we would have gone from early 2024 to 2028 without any analysis of that, apart from what happened in the middle of 2025. And the time for the analysis was in the second half of, the first and the second half of 2025, and maybe what it comes back to is, I haven't had any notice that this was going to be asked of me.
No, sorry, I sprung it on you. I apologise.
You don't have to apologise. I'm just explaining why I'm just coming up with ideas as I'm sitting here. But the stadium project is a really good example of what I'm going to talk about, because it's fully state funded. There's no equity that you have to worry about and secrecy around equity and who's involved in it. So with a state project like that, there's every reason to require the Right to Information Act to mandate that this kind of information is released publicly. All of the information about these huge projects should be released publicly, because otherwise we're indulging the government of the day in a cat and mouse game.
And when you say that, you mean released publicly at the time of the election, like during an electoral period when a party is taking it or both parties are taking it to the election?
No, I'm rolling release.
Okay.
All of the information should be released.
Right. I'm not...
and this is such a good example of it, because it's an entirely publicly funded project. The state is the proponent, the landowner, the developer and the funder.
Yeah, and the other major funding from the federal government, also public money, so therefore same argument applies. I'm mindful we've run out of time, and so, and this is a burning question from any other members who haven't had that opportunity yet. I'm prepared to leave space. No? Okay, well, we'll bring our hearing to a close. Let me say, as I mentioned at the beginning of your evidence, that what you've said to us here today is protected by parliamentary privilege, and once you leave the table you need to be aware that privilege does not attach to comments you may make to anyone, including the media, even if you're just repeating what you said to us. Do you understand that?
I do, thank you.
Thank you very much, and we really appreciate your time today and the submission that you've made. And with that, we'll end the broadcast, please.